lots of options in second base.
We have a segment we're going to be doing on every episode for till the season starts, because you are in some of those dynasty leagues. You've been doing this for a long time. You are very good at watching these players and probably have some of these guys already are rostered in your league, because when you talk about young prospects coming up, where if you're someone like me and it's May and I'm like, oh my God, this prospect came up and he's sick. Wow, that's crazy. But you're not watching closely for the last 2-3 years of him in the minor leagues and the hype around him. And you're not looking at the top 100 prospect league. They can catch you off guard. Our podcast is going to have you prepared for everything. So that's why Vinny is here with the Vinny's Prospect Report, sponsored by nobody currently, but we're open to sponsorships, obviously. So take it away, Vince. Who do you have as your prospect report for this year for second base? And I'm also going to give you a couple of questions in there. And by the way, it could be someone, if you're in a dynasty league, this is draft this guy because he's going to be great in 2025. This could be draft someone right now because he's going to be great in 2024, or look out for this guy. He's going to be a call up in June or May, and make sure you pick him up before anyone else does. So there's a variety. It swings here. There's no right or wrong when it comes to prospects, but just make us aware of some guys that maybe the rest of the average fantasy baseball players like myself are not aware of.
Yeah, so I tried to stick to guys that will have an impact this year, although I drew up 3 guys, and I think 2 of the 3 won't have much of an impact this year. So I'll start with the one that will have an impact this year, and that is without a doubt Joey Ortiz. Second base is typically a position that not a lot of guys in the minor leagues come up and just play second base. Like, we do see it occasionally. Nico Horner was like that, but most of the second basemen in major leagues are shortstops who have moved off the position, or even outfielders that we've seen move off the position, because second base isn't as demanding of a position. So, the reason why I picked Joey Ortiz is because this trade, I don't know if you know, but he just got traded from Baltimore to Milwaukee, right? In this DL Hall move. That is a massive, massive boost for his value. If anyone hasn't caught up to the hype that Joey Ortiz brings, because currently he is going at pick 688. So practically free. And the guy is going to play every day. He's going to be their starting third baseman. And if the Brewers do move on from Willy Adames, he's going to be their starting shortstop. Joey Ortiz has a fantastic glove, so he's going to play every day. And he's not blocked anymore, right? There's opportunity.
Which he was in Baltimore with all those great infielders, great young infielders that they have. Yes.
Yeah, he hits the ball hard. He's got an above average speed. He's got great contact rates, struck out at 17%, walked at 8%. So he's not going to be like this guy who saves your season and brings your team into the championship, but he's definitely one to keep on your radar, because if an injury happens to one of your second basemen, it's fantastic because he's going to be playing third base, so he's going to get eligibility elsewhere, but he still has a second base eligibility from playing in Baltimore. So he is definitely one that I want to keep an eye on.
And I'm going to ask you this with every prospect you bring up.
Sure.
Give me a ceiling MLB comp so we know what kind of guy we're looking at. I know you didn't write this down, so I'm putting you on the spot. But if you can give me just, when we look at prospects, a lot of times we're like, all right, who's a comp? Who's a guy that we can look at that's similar? If you could give me a comp that you think makes sense for Joey Ortiz, who would that be?
My gut reaction was,
and it doesn't even have to be a second baseman.
I was trying, yeah, okay, but my gut reaction was like Bryson Stott last year. I don't know, and let me just see. I can't remember if he is going to run as much as Stott is, but yeah, maybe not as much. So, guy who hits for a good average, decent power, not much speed. Maybe a Tyro Tyro runs. It's kind of hard to compare him in second base position. I'll have to think about that one, because that's a good question for him, as to who he might be comparable to Yeah, I'll have to
I
think
feel like
about
everyone wants that, right? Like when we're looking at someone, well, okay, he's an unknown with prospects, but what can he be? Am I getting a Jose Altuve or am I getting, like you said, a Bryson Stott? So that's kind of the range of people, or a Gleyber Torres, or a different position. You go outside the position, you're saying, oh, this guy statistically is very comparable to, I don't know, to Paul Goldschmidt. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So yeah,
Sure. Maybe in Jonathan India the last couple of years. Right. Jonathan doesn't run a whole lot. He hits for decent power. And if he gets into a Milwaukee lineup that ends up being pretty good, he's going to score a lot of runs.
yep.
So I could see that being a close comparison. But again, maybe India. Yeah, because India only ran that's 2022. He doesn't run a whole lot. So I would think maybe that's a close one. Jonathan India with a little less speed could be Joey Ortiz.
Speaking of speed, do you think stolen bases kind of lose a little value with the new rules? I know the steals have been up across the league. Do you think now you could kind of steal steals, to be corny about it, anywhere? Because there's some guys who, like Gleyber Torres, who was probably like a 2 to 3 steal guy, then all of a sudden jumps up to a 15 steal guy. You see that happening across the league. Do you think that you could just pick up cheap steals elsewhere and now you don't have to worry about it? Or is it like, hey, the guys who are stealing 30 are now stealing 70, so you still need to look for guys who are going to get you a ton of steals?
Yeah, I think it is more of that latter. You have to attack speed still, maybe not as strongly as you used to, but you're absolutely right. I mean, if a guy has Ronald Acuna Jr. on his team, like you're probably not going to beat him in speed unless you have attack speed and kind of a
Bobby
um,
Witt, Corbin Carroll, something like that,
yeah,
right?
right. And if you miss out on one of those, and that's why I would hate to be around like pick 10, 11, 12, because those top 8 or 9, I think, are pretty set. A lot of them bring speed. Um, and, then you don't have to attack early. But if you have to take like a Jordan Alvarez or Corey Seager, a guy who doesn't bring you a lot of speed, you're probably going to be crippled and you're going to have to attack it later in the draft. So that's a great question. Yeah.
You know what's interesting about that? We talk about the speed, and we kind of mentioned his name on last episode, but JT Realmuto, his steals stayed consistent with what he does in his career. But considering the bump that everyone else got, do you look at that as kind of like he took a step back in the stolen base category?
Who was the name you said? I'm sorry.
JT Realmuto.
Um,
Let me
did
pull
he?
up the numbers so that we're not
Sure.
talking,
Sure. Well, I think the difference between Real Muto is the position, right? Like
right.
playing catcher, how many guys are going to steal 10 bases at all? And Real Muto,
Yeah.
is he
So
you want
for
to say he's got
instance,
20?
he had 13 and 21, 21 and 22, and then only 16 and 23, and was also thrown out 5 times, which is, he was only thrown out once in 22. So his number took a step back only
Mhm.
by 5, still gets you 16 stolen bases at the catcher position. But it's like, wait, now when we adjust what stolen bases are in Major League Baseball right now, 16 is not that many. For a guy who is 21, you would expect him to have 30, the way other guys were stealing, right?
Yeah, that's a good, and it does maybe slightly worry you a little bit, right, with JT, because you hope the age doesn't come into effect here. Like, is
Exactly.
he starting to decline that way? Like, he's just not going to run anymore. But the one thing I will say about JT, and the reason why he's safe, is because he's got enough power and he's got a good enough hit tool to kind of outlast any of those. So if he doesn't steal you 20 bases, and his ADP, maybe doesn't turn out the value that you thought it might, I still think it's worth taking a shot on, because his bat is going to play. He's going to be a good enough hitter. He's in a good team. So all of the other check boxes are there. So I wouldn't be too worried about a guy like JT for that case.
All right. So you have a couple of other prospects for us before we hit our top 10. Who are those?
So again, I'll be real quick here. Jace Jung is one of them. I'm not sure if we see him this year, although I really, really, really do hope we see him this year. I see him taking kind of like that Colt Keith-esque route that Colt Keith took this year, maybe next year. But if Detroit wants to compete, this is one of their better hitters in the system. Right now, he's kind of being blocked by Matt Vierling and Zach McKinstry, which they're fine baseball players, right? I think they're good depth pieces, but I don't think that they're going to be long-term starters. Although I like them, but I like Jace Jung a lot more. He's one I would keep my eye out on, because if one of those guys gets hurt, Vierling, McKinstry, one or both, I would be shocked if they didn't at least consider bringing up Chase Young. So I think he's one to definitely keep your eye on. And he's got the bloodlines, right? We've seen it with Josh Young this year, right? They're
Yep.
brothers. So he hits the ball well. He's got a great plate approach. And so I think he could take a huge step forward once he gets his playing time. I don't know if you want to say anything about him.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just remember when Josh Young, for me, was the type of guy who came out of nowhere.
Mhm.
I wasn't as locked in, and some people are, yeah, of course. And I remember I met him last year actually at MLB Network, and
That's cool.
he just a cool dude, just walks in, not a big guy either, just kind of walks in, carries himself kind of like he was just chilling. Like nobody, I remember it's funny because the comp between him and the other guy, Pedro Martinez. Now, Josh Young is bigger than Pedro Martinez, but he came in with like a couple of friends, maybe a girlfriend or something, and everyone was kind of milling around the office and no one really paid attention to him. Pedro walked in alone, and he's a tiny dude, but all of a sudden everyone turns their head and everyone's like, oh my God, it's freaking Pedro. So it's kind of funny. But yeah, because Josh Young to me was just this under the radar guy, but he was killing it last year. And it's a major part of that lineup that you talked about earlier when you were talking about Simeon is going to be just a god lineup in Texas, right?
Yeah. And so that's actually, you mentioned he was kind of under the radar last year. If you are paying attention, I'm not saying you're not paying attention, but he definitely was one of those guys. He was one of those guys. I was not at all shocked.
That's why I'm here now.
Performance. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Because so
He
many
just-
people so many people in my league were like, yep, if you're on Prospects Watch, you knew that this guy was happening. And that's why we're doing this Prospect Watch right now. And if you tell me that guy has a brother who's going to get playing time, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to take him. I'm going to find a way to roster that guy.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, he, and this is where it's tough because I think other factors come in. It's not just who's the best player, right? They have financial considerations and, contract obligations, things like that. So it's hard for him to maybe find playing time, Jace Jung, right now. But again, if one thing falls, whether it's Vierling, McKinstry injury, or they just are not performing, definitely see Jace Jung getting in there. And my last one is a similar story. It is Ryan Bliss of the Seattle Mariners. Guy's got huge pop and speed. He was hitting 358 in 68 games in AA. Just stupid numbers, 12 home runs, 30 steals, just like ridiculous stuff. The only problem is now they have Jorge Polanco at second base, and they're starting to try to bolster that offense a little bit more with major league talent. So I don't think he's going to get a shot right away, but he's going to probably play at AAA. He ended the year at AAA last year. He's going to start there again. If he is hitting like he was last year, I don't see, I see a world where they could bring him up part-time bat. So he's just one. His name's Ryan Bliss again. Just keep your eye on, because again, we've seen Jorge Polanco's injury history and it's not always the greatest. So if he gets injured and Bliss is knocking down the door, I wouldn't be surprised to see Ryan Bliss get some starts.